My name is Raul Rebane. I'm a former journalist from Estonia and at modern time the consultant of strategic communication, and we have two specialists to discuss this matter. And Mark Fischer is the managing director of European offices, German Marshall Fund of the United States. Jarmo Makela is a well-known journalist, foreign affairs in Finland, working in a lot of countries, Washington, Brussels, Moscow, Bonn, and as far as I know, wrote a lot of articles about NATO. The first question, let's start quickly. Does NATO have enough soft power?
Thanks for the question. I think if you ask me that promptly and that clearly, I think NATO does not have enough soft power. You can almost never have enough soft power. Specifically, the experience over the last more than 10 years now in Afghanistan has shown that when you engage in long-term conflicts, soft power is almost as important as hard power. And when I talk about soft power, I mean soft power within the theater that you operate in, getting the population that you operate in to understand what you're doing and that what you're doing, as we all believe, is in their interest, but also having the soft power to convince, of course, your public at home that the investment in lives and in money that you spend in operations like this is worth it. And in that respect, I think there is a consensus that NATO has not been successful enough, but it's also a very steep challenge. But this analysis that NATO needs to become better in winning the hearts and minds and expanding on soft power is something that is, I think, shared by all the partners and by the organization itself. And there are several initiatives ongoing to address the situation. One of them, if you permit me, is actually ongoing right now in the beautiful country that we are in Latvia. The Latvian government is proposing to host and to create a center of excellence for strategic communication, which would be the tool, so to say, to address this shortcoming in soft power. And the discussions that the Latvian government has had with different NATO allies have shown that many of these allies agree to the definition of the problem. And the question now, of course, is how to make such a center of excellence, first of all, operational, and then also how to make it as effective as possible.
It's very nice to hear, because I'm from Estonia, where we have experience in this field. 2007 Bronze Soldier crisis, and as we know, Latvia is always under constant some kind of pressure. So these kind of things which take a little bit away this tension or ease them, they're very important for us.
Undeniably, all Baltic countries, and of course, have experience with strategic communications, going out but also coming in, if I may put it diplomatically. And that obviously is also a strong motivator actually to address this and to become better at understanding what one can do in order to explain policies to the populations.
Thank you. Jarmo, I think we know each other 25 years or more. And if somebody said to you 25 years ago that in 2010 Estonia will be the member of NATO, European Union, and have Euro, what would you say in these days?
Well, at the time when we met, we were very concerned whether the Soviet Union would let Estonia and the other Baltic countries go or not. And there were serious incidents in all of the three countries that we needed to be very worried about. Yes, we've come a long way from that.
In June, the Finnish president was thinking about different strategies of the Finnish state, and one of these strategies was NATO strategy. And you were moderator of this important part of this conference. What is the situation? We follow very carefully Finland and Sweden your steps towards NATO or not?
Well, I think that there was a fairly big consensus in this group of people, of about 45 people, specialists and diplomats and decision makers, on the three pillars on which the Finnish security is built on. One, universal conscription. Second, aerial defense. And the third is the point of contention, whether do it independently, that is, not being allied, or do it within alliance. This is obviously a decision that needs to be taken sometime in the future, and there no consensus exists.
Sweden is definitely much bigger than Finland, probably a little bit richer, but there are alarming articles last year too about the defense capabilities of Sweden, and probably you in Finland don't miss these remarks.
Well, if you think of the situation in the north, the first thing that you have to decide in your mind is whether you look at Finland and Sweden as two separate entities or as a one unit. And I think that at this moment there are some arguments that say that you need to look them separately. But this is only due to the different kind of situation that we have entered into. Sweden used to be the really strong defense force in Scandinavia and in Northern Europe, much stronger than anybody else around the area, individually, tremendously. Now the Swedes have come to a situation where they will have to decide what they will do, whether they will start build up again or whether they will seek alliance to do it with them. As for we are in a situation where the downwards trend has just started, and we know that by 2015 we have to make a decision as well, whether we really are able to keep up a credible independent defense or not. And I think that's going to be a very hard choice, and Sweden and Finland are going to make the decisions on the same year.
One of the principles of psychological warfare is that very often you don't know that you are under attack and you don't understand that you have lost. Sorry, but sometimes we feel that being in this territory, which were Latvia, Estonia, Baltics, under the constant pressure, that West is concerning soft power.
I can certainly attest that, having lived and worked in Brussels for 12 years, and also having actually witnessed, so to say, on the ground the accession of the Baltic countries and the other Central and Eastern European countries to first NATO and then the European Union, you could see certainly in the first years, 2004, 2005, and even up to today, a different, first of all, in threat perception. There's no question at all. No, obviously, this has to do with geography and with geography, with history, and those are things that you can't change very quickly. Even a decade in that respect is not a long time. And those are hard experiences that the populations in these countries have made, and the political elites are very aware of it. Whereas in Western Europe, so to say, there was always a buffer zone, even though Germany, of course, obviously was also on the border during the Cold War. I think the differences in perception and the differences in say, sensitivity towards, as you say, particular operations, is not as strong anymore as it was in the beginning. I think there's a learning process. There has been a learning process. At least I'm as optimistic as to say that when I look at the political discourse, and when you look at, for example, the threat assessments that you have within NATO, also within the European Union, towards outside on the continent, and towards when you look at the eastern border, I think there's a convergence. the convergence that we didn't have on the euro, at least we have it in economic terms. We have it, I think, on the threat perception certainly, and on the next step that we have to take now, of course, is to become better at formulating concrete policies in order how to counter this. I mean, the threat perception is the first step, or the perception of what is ongoing is the first step, but it doesn't get you anywhere if you don't become more effective at policy formulation. I think that is where we still have to become better, whether this is NATO or EU.
I'm afraid a little bit that in this conference already the first panel gave a little hint to this, that we will see certain part of pessimism or not enough optimism in the future. This is the real, I mean, this is soft power. Losing optimism is something which could be vital in a certain moment. So, is this a case of soft power?
It is. I mean, look, the way that you talk about yourself actually has a profound impact on the soft power that you have. If Europe talks about its own demise all of the time, nobody will believe that the European model is something to emulate and is something that has worth in the world and that should have weight. Let me do a little twist, because I just actually arrived from before this conference in a seminar where we discussed this for 1.5 days, specifically the role of Europe in the world. I see it on two sides. On the one side is, even 5, 6 years ago, even 3 years ago, you would have had a lot of people, specifically in Brussels, who had, in my mind, unrealistic ideas about the weight and about the role of specifically now I'm talking about the European Union in the world, who were much too naive and, to use a metaphor, they were living in cloud cuckoo home, this major force to influence how the world was thinking, and that we were all going into post-nationalistic stage. I think the last 3-4 years have been a very rude shock and wake up to reality. And of course, they have been a hard experience, but not only for the EU or not only for Europe. This was a world economic crisis. I live in the United States now. The crisis there is very real, has been very real, still is very real, even though the growth numbers are a bit more positive than they are in Europe. What is important is to start a realistic debate about how we want to portray ourselves, what our interests are, and actually that we have to define interests as Europeans. Not as Germany, not as France, not as the UK, not as the Baltics, as Europeans. This is difficult, of course, in a multinational organization, but it's necessary. And then we have to be very realistic and hard-nosed about following those interests and implementing them. Once we are starting to be successful in doing that, our soft power will grow, because people will see that we actually can get something done.
Raul, allow me to answer your original question, because I think that very much with what Mark just said, but I would like to emphasize it from a slightly different point of view. Now, if you ask whether NATO has soft power or enough soft power, I do agree it has some soft power, yes, but if it has enough, of course, depends how many hearts and minds there needs to be convinced. And where do those hearts and minds are geographically located? Now, if we think of the Islamic world, no way. NATO doesn't have the soft power to win over their hearts and minds, but they don't have to. Secondly, if you think in terms of Afghanistan and Libya, there is a real problem. There's a significant military involvement, there's a significant military input there, but you are still not winning over the hearts and minds. This is a great problem. Where NATO, and I think that military organizations, by the way, are good in winning over hearts and minds. At least they have to be assisted by some other organizations to do so. But where NATO definitely has an ability to improve its capability in this respect is within the NATO member countries. Correct. And I think that in this respect, the attitude has been too relaxed. It has been considered to be self-evident that everybody would more or less agree the role that the NATO is playing. I think a more consensus effort should be done to boost the role and the image of NATO within the NATO countries. And since the hearts and minds need to be won over also in Sweden and Finland, if something positive happens within the NATO countries themselves, it definitely will have an impact in Finland and Sweden.
It's actually a very good point, because we know traditionally that so-called winter war spirit and very high wish to defend their country, and this is in a very high level. And now when the neighboring image is lower than inside the country, it's very difficult to win the hearts and minds. This is very understandable, very good point.
Let me just comment. I couldn't agree more to what you say. I mean, we've all become to take NATO for granted. Within the confines of the debate on strategic communication, it's tricky, because strategic communication by itself is usually only meant to influence your theater of operation, or your enemy, so to say, or at least where you operate. When you come towards let me use it as it is, influencing public opinion at home, there are, based on historical precedents also, of course, there are sensitivities. Some people say, well, are we doing propaganda? Are we doing spin? Yes. And this is something that needs to be carefully discussed. Yes. What I would say is the following. There are deficits, first of all, in our really capabilities in order to think through what it means, what strategic communication means, and how we should use it, specifically new media and the way that the media environment has completely changed. The second thing is there's a real disconnect between policy formulation, where it's like, okay, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, and how you communicate that. Normally, in a perfect world, you would have somebody think about how policy is communicated, what the narrative is, so to say, is very often used this word, at the moment of policy formulation. That almost never happens. So basically policy gets formulated, and then it's, if I may be so blunt, it gets dumped into the lap of people, like, and now you sell this. That's a very, very difficult exercise. And this goes, and I say, this goes for the internal as for the external factor. I think we have to become better. We have to have the right people around the table when policy gets formulated. And we have to train our generation of politicians. I'm very critical in this respect. I can be, I'm a think tank person, to become better at explaining why they do what they do. If you don't explain it right, you're not going to take people with you in making painful decisions. If you mandate an operation like going to Afghanistan halfway across the world and putting soldiers in harm's way, you had better have a really, not only really good reasons, but you had better be very well able to tell what these reasons are, have a good narrative. And this for me is not spin. This is something that you need to do. You need to go out there, politicians need to go out there and put their political capital on the line.
I don't think that you can really make a clear distinction between using soft power as a domestic or as a foreign instrument. I think that they are interconnected very much, and they have to play with the same rules both abroad and domestically. I just would like to add a word of urgency, or a sense of urgency, to all what you just said, by saying that the Russians are learning very quickly, and I think that they are making a major attempt to develop their own idea and version of soft power, also to influence the minds of the NATO member countries and those who are outside.
So it was very interesting. I have to say that, to conclude this conversation, we in Estonia, we have experience of attack and defense. And what was the most important factor of winning this battle was common values, to be proud, civil society. And if we together, we are proud what the European Union, what NATO is doing, then this is the best way to win mind and hearts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.